you have a long chapter on Ibram X Kendi, who has been much in the news recently. So one of you want to sort of kind of start out with by recapping a little bit why he has been in the news now?
The essential, obviously, we don't know all the details. We just have some reports from people who were part of the center, some issues of finance, and a commitment, at least so far, by Boston University to carry on an investigation of just what's going on. So it all began about a week ago with the announcement that roughly half the staff at his Center to Anti-Racism Center at Boston University, about half the staff, they say 15 to 20 people, it was announced were going to be laid off, or actually laid off on that day. And once the staff was laid off, I would say a significant number of members of that center in different capacities start to express concerns about Ibram X Kendi's autocratic style, the fact that all the power and all the money was concentrated in his hands, and that there wasn't follow through on certain of the projects that he was committed to undertaking in return for the money that he received. And then the complaints gradually escalated to the point that the claim was made that the center hadn't produced anything or nearly anything of scholarly or political value, and that he was, Ibram X Kendi was basically just using the center to promote what's called his books, with a plural. It's really not books. It's a book, and then 14, literally 14 spin-offs from that book. So the claim was made that he was just using it as a vehicle to promote his books. I happen to have been in contact, in correspondence with several of the people who were registering their complaints formally to the media, and in private, in correspondence over the past 2 to 3 years, the commentary was much more scathing, and there were indications that if an audit is done on the center, it's going to show many sordid and squalid things going on there. I mention it because one of the people I was in correspondence with is now a prominent critic in public. However, as you can imagine, given his financial backing, people are concerned about making too many charges or allegations in public because he's in a position to destroy careers. The center had accumulated over 2 years not less than $43 million. That's not a trivial sum. It started with Jack Dorsey from Twitter giving 10 million. Then the Rockefeller Fund gave, I think, 1 million, and then it just started to pour in. And they claim it still has an endowment of 17 million, but that means that about 25 million have disappeared.
And they've produced nothing.
Nothing. That I was told in correspondence in very detailed terms. Nothing. So, in my opinion, the financial mismanagement, and that's the best spin you can put on it, mismanagement. It may be much more than financial mismanagement. The financial mismanagement is an element of the story. As one friend of mine wrote, African-American professor, she wrote to me, she's reluctant to criticize other Blacks in public, but she said to me, maybe the money could have been better spent on scholarships. Well, in terms of scholarships, 25 million can go somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
It can go somewhere. But to me, that's one aspect of the question. The other aspect, which is, in my opinion, wholly separate, is that Kendi's basically a charlatan and a hustler.
Well, let's talk about that.
Okay, allow me just, and I don't say that loosely, as Cornel West lamented in the interview I did with him, that my footnotes in the Kendi chapter went on and on and on and on. And I'm sure you'll agree with that.
Yeah, well, so I was going to say, I mean, you do spend quite a bit of time. I mean, you have read his writing closely.
Yes, I go through it line by line, actually.
Yeah.
And if I went through a line by line, there was a reason. And the reason is very simple. Let's look at his academic background. He went to Florida A&M,
Mm-hmm.
a historically Black college.
Mm-hmm.
He then he got his PhD in African American Studies from Temple University. He studied under this character called Molefe Asante, who's known for his Afrocentric worldview. I would not say he's taken seriously as a scholar, Molefe Asante. My opinion, I know enough about the area to speak with some authority, not a lot of authority, but some authority. And then he gets catapulted into stardom with his book Stamped from the Beginning. And it wins a National Book Award.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I mention all this because I go through the book. There's nothing there. It's just name calling. Everybody's a racist. Du Bois was a racist. Frederick Douglass was a racist. Richard Wright was a racist. Everybody is a racist except Angela Davis, Eldridge Cleaver, Dora Neale Hurston, and himself. The rest of African American history, all those Black leaders are all racist. So, as I called in my book, it's a bizarro history of African Americans. And yet, apart from some conservatives, nobody said any critical word about the book. You go and look for a critical review, you will not find it. I can name people who I asked them to their face, why haven't you said anything? This book is preposterous. And I thought I would do what nobody else did. I said some people on the right, but they didn't really read the book because the book is impossible to read. It's so lunatic. It's so screwball. You can't read it. I don't believe any of the judges on the National Book Award panel read that book. They don't. They just do it to show how woke they are. They don't read any of it.
What if they just read the introduction and it was like woke enough for them?
Exactly. And so I decided to sit down and go through it line by line and ask a simple question. Is there anything there? There's nothing there. And that to me is the bigger scandal. The complete abdication of intellectual responsibility and a complete betrayal of the whole field of African American studies, which took so long to become entrenched as a serious area of inquiry. Now, most of these studies programs, when they began in the latter part of the 1960s, they were seen as bones that were thrown to Latinos, African Americans, women, as a result of the turbulence in the 1960s. And a lot of the turbulence then became focused on college campuses to change the curriculum. But they weren't taken seriously as academic disciplines. It took time. And after all the blood, sweat, and tears of serious scholars to establish the field, they allowed this complete huckster and charlatan to become the arbiter of African American studies and the arbiter of what is and what isn't racism. It was such a complete abdication and betrayal of what the whole field is about. When I was speaking with Dr. West about it, after lamenting the length of the footnotes, he said, when you read, at one point in that chapter, I systematically juxtapose W.E.B. Du Bois with Ibram X Kendi. And this is what Dr. West did. He said, watch my hands. He said, after reading that juxtaposition, he says, Du Bois is up here and Kendi is down there. He said, he's so shallow. He's so shallow. He said, it's like comparing, and you'll appreciate it much more than I can. He said, it's like comparing John Coltrane and Kenny G.
I mean, especially because Kendi really, I know he wins a National Book Award from Stamp from the beginning, but more people know him from How to Be an Anti-Racist, which becomes a whole industry in and of itself. And it's one part memoir and it's one part how-to guide, I guess. And in How to Be an Anti-Racist, again, he starts off the book by saying, if you're going to be anti-racist, you have to be anti-capitalist. You can't be.
No. Capitalism does not fit in. Is not a place in his repertoire.
But that's how to be an anti-racist starts.
You don't take $10 million from Jack Dorsey and say you're anti-capitalist. You're very careful about that.
Well, I'm agreeing with you, but that's how to be an anti-racist starts. And I think for not everybody that read it, but for a lot of people that read it, if you were calling yourself some sort of leftist or Marxist, maybe that's the only thing you needed to then fall in line with the rest of the book.
I think
go ahead.
There's a little misunderstanding there, which I suffered from.
Mm-hmm.
So we may be on the same page here.
Mm-hmm.
You may recall that with this whole woke culture, they began to use the expression disparities.
Yes.
They wanted to eliminate the disparities in wealth.
Yes.
Now, when I first heard that, I thought that meant they want to redistribute wealth. That's what I thought ending disparities meant. That you want to end the disparity in the distribution of wealth. It wasn't until I started to read Adolph Reed that I understood ending disparity has nothing whatsoever to do with wanting to redistribute wealth, the disparity between the 1% and the 99%. That's not what it means. It means ending the disparity of the number of non-white people in the ruling elite. So if the 1% has a 13% representation of Black people, because 13% of Americans are African American lineage. If that 1% has 13% African American, you've ended the disparity. They're not talking about redistributing the wealth.
Not at all.
They're just talking about being represented in the ruling elite proportional to their representation in the population. So you, like me, I'm the first one to admit it. You, like me, might think when he's talking about ending the disparities, he's talking about ending the disparities between the 1% and the 99%. No, he's fine. The whole woke culture is fine with 1% controlling half our country's wealth. Actually, 3 individuals in our country, 3, control more wealth than 40% of.
But is any of them a black lesbian woman that's left-handed with the club foot? That's what she does.
As long as you have one representative of that ilk.
Of that.
Yeah, well, that'll be a third. That'd be great representation.
Then you've ended the disparity. So you might have construed what he was saying in How to Be an Anti-Racist to mean he wants to redistribute.
Well, I think what Jason's saying is that book literally starts with this line right at the beginning or early in the book where it says, oh, to be an anti-racist, you have to be an anti-capitalist. But then the thought disappears for the rest of the book after that, he doesn't go back to it. He sort of gestures at this at the beginning. And then like the rest of it is very much along the lines of what Norm is saying, right? Because that's really his politics. I mean,
otherwise,
sort of radical flourish here and there.
You're biting the hand that feeds you.
Well, that's why why do you think Jack Dorsey wants to give him $10 million? It's the same reason why people love lean and feminism.
My opinion is perfectly obvious. It's the same reason that Jeff Bezos gave Barack Obama $100 million, and the same reason Jeff Bezos gave Van Jones $100 million. And the same reason why all these foundations poured money into Ibram X Kendi.
You have been watching free public content from Give Them an Argument. To access every single episode of the show, the main show on Monday nights, all of the streams, all of the debate breakdowns, all of the patron-exclusive post-games on Monday nights, all of the patron-exclusive bonus episodes every week, and much, much more, go to patreon.com/Ben Burgis. I cannot resist ending this with, don't be foolish.